Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, and welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. I'm excited to have with me today in our discussion about how learning drives digital transformation. I have Dr. Sandra Lachlan, the Chief Learning Scientist and Global Head of Chief Learning and Talent Enablement at EPAM. Hi, Sandra. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And we're going to be talking about learning and digital transformation and engaging our workforce and how to retain talent and acquire talent, which is so important and critical in our environment, if not now more than ever, with how fast things are changing, how the world around us is changing, the complexity of the workplace and our just in general. So I'm looking forward to kind of gaining your perspective and some tips that you can offer our community. And also just want to share with those that are listening in or watching us today, a little bit about you, and also recognize your organization for receiving a Learning and Development Award in 2022, and also an award from our program in 2021 for the future of work. So congratulations, that you were recognized by our team at Brandon Hall Group within our HCM Excellence Awards program, and also a community of our judging panel that's ranges from learning and HCM professionals around the world. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was very exciting.
And I mentioned I introduced a little bit about your role at EPAM and just a little bit more about you that I'd like to share with our listeners today is that Dr. Sandra Lachlan is a learning scientist and organizational psychologist focused on aligning people to digitally driven business transformation. As Chief Learning Scientist at EPAM Systems, she is responsible for bringing in EPAM's many internal and external facing educational activities under one umbrella and ensuring they incorporate cutting edge educational practices and collectively drive business growth, quality, and results. And which is interesting, it's not an easy task, I'm sure, being that you are so dispersed and a company of about, about 60,000 employees.
Yep.
And you've grown organically. Just a little bit about EPAM. It is a digital or a leading digital transformation services and product engineering company with expertise in technology, digital data, product, and innovation. And in engineering itself, you are interacting or engaging a lot of engineers and scientists as you are. So, their minds are very complex, and your products are complex, and your services are complex. So, yes. I think our conversation today is going to be an interesting one. So let's start with, what does digital transformation mean to you? I mentioned it a lot.
Yeah, that's a good question. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. So I guess I'll give my perspective on this. So people often hear this term and think it's technology. If we can just adopt technology, our company will transform and everything will be great. But the goal of digital transformation isn't to adopt technology. It's actually to make your customers happier, right? To meet their needs more efficiently or effectively, to expand the footprint even of your customer base. And so the real focus of transformation isn't the technology. The technology is only a mechanism by which you are better able to support your clients. And what's really important to know about, at least from my perspective, about transformation is that it really isn't even primarily about technology. technology is great, right? Like it's it allows you to do things more efficiently, more effectively, more broadly. But technology is only a tool, right? The people are the ones who have to understand and implement that tool, and then evolve that tool and ensure that it's continually meeting the needs of the business. And so when we think about transformation, we think about it from the perspective of all the kind of fundamental pillars, which to me would be technology, right? But it's data, it's people, it's innovation, it's product mindset, and it's a new orientation toward management and leadership.
Right. And our research aligns with that thought process, especially, as we look at technology serving talent and learning in the workplace. The technology is great, but if you don't have a good strategy in place or a process that you can enable it, then it's not optimized to its potential. And so oftentimes, as we help companies look at technology or select technology or revamp what they have, we see a lot of how they're dissatisfied with it. And it's not always the technology. It's just really understanding how they can apply it and how they can leverage it, and make sure that it works within their process. Otherwise,
Exactly.
it's just not being leveraged effectively. And then in your role as a chief learning scientist and head of client learning and talent enablement, why did EPAM establish? It's a unique role. I think you don't hear a lot of companies having this type of title, which is fantastic. Why did EPAM establish the division focused on client learning and enablement?
Well, I think it was because our clients were experiencing just the challenge that you've articulated, right? So we are a technology company. We are, really great at providing technology services and products. And clients were coming to us, expecting that our tech services in and of themselves are going to drive this, business transformation that they were looking for. And consistently, it didn't happen because, as we've discussed, technology itself isn't the mechanism for change, right? It's the people that have to implement and drive. And so, our clients needed this. And on top of that, they kept asking for our help. So, EPAM, like we're a really effective engineering company. Like we have, as we described, like organic growth, like really effective employees. Were able to retain and develop top talent in ways that, others are not able to do. And so they've often come to us and just said, like, what is your magic? How are you getting people to come to your company and stay and grow and learn and be happy and engaged? Like, we want to recreate that within our own organization. And so our practice was kind of created out of these dual challenges for our clients, needing to develop their own in-house capabilities around technology and data and product and so on. And also looking for guidance and support from a company like EPAM, who has seen all the good and bad there is to see with transformation. Like in the past 30 years, we have worked closely with some of the world's most advanced organizations, and we have seen companies succeed. We have seen them fail. And as a result, we're able to kind of pull some of those learnings out and create programs for clients that really enable them to develop their in-house capabilities and really align technology and people and data with their business strategy.
And you mentioned you were able to pull out some of the learning strategies. What are some of the learning strategies would you recommend companies to focus on as they look at digital transformation?
Oh, so there's a lot. I guess there are a number of audiences that companies really need to address from a learning perspective if they want to buck the trend of transformation, which is, I think everyone knows this, something like 70% of transformations fail. This is millions and in some cases billions of dollars that are spent. And it's often because there isn't this emphasis on people. It's kind of like, if we build the technology, they will come, and that's just not the case. And so when we have seen clients be successful in achieving their transformation goals, one of the things that they do is focus on education for all the critical stakeholders within the organization. So when people think about this, they often think about your technologists, right? You have your cloud engineers, you have your product managers. They do need to know and do things differently. They need really effective learning programs. But it needs to go beyond that. We have found time and again with our clients that IT leaders are an often overlooked audience for transformation education, and they are potentially even the most critical, right? Like, you need people at the top of the organization who themselves are deeply knowledgeable in the technologies and in the business connections, like how those technologies will drive business. And really importantly, they need to also be educated on how to take an organization who in many cases has historically performed as a kind of a back office function and transform that organization to be a partner and a thought leader with the business to rethink the organization. So this is a huge challenge for technology leaders. And it's something that when companies are successful, they recognize and they do kind of front and center as they are planning out or implementing their transformation. Another area that is super important is to break down the communication barriers between the technology and the business. Often what we find is that the business does not speak tech and tech does not speak the business. And so as a result, you don't have a common language and a common kind of foundational understanding for change. And so we've seen companies succeed with programs that are digital literacy or digital enablement. Like it's a crash course for the organization in the pillars of transformation. And very importantly, how those pillars are specifically related to the business strategy of that particular organization and what it means for the major kind of role categories. I guess the last thing that we see companies do well and not well is take that same mentality as it relates to data. So digital people, it really encompasses a lot of things. Data is a really important drill down for almost every role within an organization. People need to be less afraid of data. They need to understand how to leverage it, how to gather it, how to communicate it, how to make decisions based on it. And so data literacy is another really important area. And again, that audience is not just technologists or data scientists, really, it's the entire organization, but at kind of the appropriate level for the different roles.
Interesting points you made. I agree with all three of them. Basically, it's interesting you point out how tech needs to understand the business needs to understand tech. And again, I look at training or learning in HR functions, and often, that has been kind of the theme, I would say over the last 10 years that, that HR or training needs to have a better, I think more HR is kind of the scapegoat or the black sheep, where when it comes to understanding the business or positioned in a way that they are better aligned with the business. So I think that's changing, but I think where they always feel that they are not getting the voice or not having a seat at the table. But I think better kind of supporting them in a way, same with tech, leaders, is that, they know their jobs well, but it does have to align with what the business needs. Otherwise, what's the point,
Absolutely. Yes.
And so, I think, being able to have that ability to have, tech leaders understanding, how does that tech work for the business and what does the business need? Then that makes a better conversation and a better impact. And then the data, having the ability to make better decisions and to communicate around the data leads or segues into my next question around business impact and how can they, how can learning and talent leaders, what can they do differently to impact the digital learning programs? What would you say, kind of continuing kind of that line of thought here?
Yes, the data, right? Like what data can we point to show the effectiveness of spend? I think that's one of a big challenge that the industry faces, right? And I think this is not a big secret. Only 25 cents on every dollar that's spent on learning programs has a really demonstrable impact. And that's a big problem because, companies are facing these incredible skill gaps where, in some cases it's an existential crisis. Like they have to have certain skills in the organization in order to compete effectively in the market. And so a lot of money is kind of being put into education programs and training initiatives, and it's not always making that impact. So I'll answer the question, I guess, in two parts. One is to say the impact that we should be measuring that very few people actually measure effectively is behavior change. And, that's I guess, the direct measure. And then kind of an indirect measure would be business growth. But, I always think it's I always get really frustrated when people try to directly connect a learning program to like revenue growth. That's not really how it works. We first have to get the intermediate step of people knowing and doing things differently in their roles. And so, in many cases, organizations are tracking the impact of programs by things that aren't really about learning, right? It's how many people, how many courses, how many hours spent. It's really about the inputs as opposed to the outputs. How have people's behaviors changed? What do they know now that they didn't know before? And so kind of as a learning scientist, like that's my focus, right? It's not on the delivery of information. It's on the change in the person as a result of some kind of effective learning experience. So this really begs the question of like, how do you get to that effective learning experience? And I think it's funny. I feel as though like humans don't believe in magic except when it relates to training and learning. It's kind of like if we just give people access to content, magically they're going to learn from it and absorb it and everything will be great. And of course that's, as learning experts, we know that couldn't be further from the truth. But it's often how I have seen organizations approach their digital learning challenges. They get access to content and they maybe will link it to kind of give learning paths to certain like roles, but there's no motivation that's built in. There's no practical application. There's no deep embeddedness with the role. There's no expert feedback, expert coaching, and assessment. These are the really critical things that we know drive real learning. And so, if I could give guidance to learning and talent leaders in this space, it would be think beyond the content, like really focus on creating capability academies, these really involved, really effective, intensive learning experiences, and look for expertise. Like the best instruction, especially for complex roles like cloud engineers or data engineers, right, comes from experts in cloud and data. It doesn't come from generic content. And so looking for that expertise and then building programs that effectively incorporate cutting edge content tailored to the role, plus embedded activities, job role connections, assessment and feedback and coaching. That's really where you find the magic, if you will, of learning. It's doable. It's just not what most people do.
Right. And, it's an ecosystem, right, of providing it, aligning with what skills they need, the gaps, and then having that continuous approach to providing feedback and support when needed or learning when needed. And part of your role as talent enablement, what does that look like within the context of digital transformation?
So that's more around, we've been talking about learning, and that's super important. But you also have to have people in your organization to educate, and then they need to be engaged to stay and keep learning. And so the talent enablement part is really around aligning people to your digital strategy. So, in nuts and bolts terms, this means, how do you attract people who have the right skills or who can, evolve their skills? Once you have them, how do you effectively ensure that their skills are aligned to your strategy? And then how do you keep them? Like, once you have them, how do you keep them engaged? And so I mentioned previously that, EPAM is kind of known in the industry for having a talent approach that is pretty unique. We have lots of awards around our talent approaches. And it's really how we do this. How do we attract, develop, and retain great technologists? And so our practice kind of takes what we've learned and the tools that we've built and the resources that we've developed, and we translate those and kind of tailor those for specific customers. So, for instance, if you are an organization that needs to grow capabilities in cloud, which is almost every organization, it's likely that you as an organization have a lot of outsourced talent, but you're probably also trying to bring some of that talent back in-house for a lot of reasons. So we have a lot of clients who come to us and say, we want to move in this direction. We don't really know exactly where to go. Can you help? And in this case, what we're doing is we're helping, from end to end, which is starting with identifying what are the cloud skills and capabilities that are aligned to your business strategy. Once you know what those skills are, how do you measure whether somebody has those skills? And then how do you motivate them to grow those skills? And then everything else comes into place. How do you educate? How do you mentor? How do you hire to find these skills? How do you combine formal and informal education to really help people grow those skills? So the talent enablement is really, it's really about making sure that you have, to fulfill your transformation and your digital vision, you need to have the right people, and they need to have the right skills and the motivation to continue to grow those skills. So that's really how I see the connection between talent enablement and transformation.
Fascinating. And as we wrap up today, what are some of the tips you mentioned, around talent enablement, but what are some, concrete tips you can offer companies if they want to improve to attract, retain, and develop their talent, or in technology talent? Yeah. And you mentioned a bit. So if you can sum it up in like 3 to 5 things, what would you recommend?
Okay. Well, I'll start with the one that I think you had alluded to earlier, which is this kind of the role that HR and L&D have historically played in organizations. It's often been the case that there has been a kind of a wall often between your technologists and your people teams. And it's like HR kind of, IT throws over the wall, like we need to hire cloud engineers, and HR says, okay, I'm going to go and do this. And then, and then they are hiring, but they're not hiring quite the right people. It can be really inefficient. And so one concrete tip that we offer and we help our clients develop is a true partnership between HR, L&D, and the technology organizations to really maximize the effectiveness of the retention, development, and hiring approaches. Like it can't just be one or the other. It really needs to be a true partnership, and most organizations don't have that. So number one, I think that's, I guess, my biggest piece of advice. The second piece is, and this kind of goes back to the point around motivation. I think we all kind of recognize that not everyone is going to pick up the learning mantle and run with it. We have a lot of organizations who put out training materials, who put out really fantastic courses even, and there's not the right amount of uptake. People aren't utilizing it, they're not applying it. And so the second piece of advice that I would give organizations is really think about what are the appropriate motivators for employees to truly learn, not just endure information, not just click through, get through some content, but really engage mentally and with their time and energies to learn something new and complex that's valuable for the organization. In my field, there's this kind of distillation of research, and it's called Theory One, which is people will have the appropriate, people will learn much of what they need to learn if they have the appropriate opportunity and motivation to learn that thing. And I think as leaders, we often focus on the opportunity and not really emphasize the motivation. So there are a number of mechanisms that organizations can use to apply appropriate motivation to learning. I guess that's the second piece of advice that I would have, is really sit down and figure out what you need to do to get your employees to truly engage and learn. And it's probably not just going to be intrinsic motivation. I'll say that. And I guess the third thing is this is a hard thing. I mean, all of these are hard, I guess, but this is a hard but really really important thing, which is, we're talking about skills and learning and talent enablement. But until you as an organization have sat down and looked at your technology strategy, your business strategy, and then said, okay, what does that mean for the roles in our organization? What exactly does, a product manager level 3 need to know and do differently in order to make this vision come to life? Like really, taking the big picture and distilling it down into clearly identified competencies and skills for roles so that people know what they need to learn and what they need to develop. And you as an organization know whether you have all the right skills that you need or if there are big gaps, right? This translation of strategy into role definition is something that is incredibly important, not simple, but it is absolutely essential to getting impact and ROI from talent and learning investments.
Absolutely. And those are all critical things that talent, learning, and companies should really think about as they're looking at their digital talent and acquiring digital talent and retaining and engaging. So this was very helpful. Thank you, Sandra. I like also the point you make about motivation is a really important driver. And I think it's hard to understand what motivates someone. We look at EVP a lot too. Mm-hmm. We're doing a new study on employee value proposition and motivation and kind of understanding the value and the culture of the company and aligning that when you're recruiting or communicating that at the very beginning to ensure that the values match kind of the value of your employer, or your employees, is one, facet amongst many other facets, because it's hard, and we don't know always what motivates an individual, and that changes as well as over time too, depending on where you are in your career and in your journey. So I think having a way to kind of understanding and kind of communicating the values and what motivates and trying to adjust that is important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm also looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks here in Palm Beach at our HCM Excellence Conference. Really excited to bring it back. We haven't had a conference live since 2020, so we've been trying. Last year, we're almost there, but it just didn't happen. So we're really excited. In just a few weeks, we'll be seeing you in person, and I'm looking forward to connecting. And thank you for sharing your perspective today.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Take care until we meet again very soon.